So that's what I do. I'm a cybersecurity architect. During the day, sometimes I play the role of a security advisor, not very different. But then most of what I've been focusing on in the past 6 years, thereabouts, has been, and not in any particular order, cybersecurity strategy, analysis, planning, cyber resilience, which is something we'll talk about today. Threat protection is, I was having a conversation with him earlier, there is, in security, there is the offense and there's the defense. So threat protection is always you're trying to protect. So it will mostly fall within the defense. And incident response. So that's another area in security where if you think of it, hold on, Chief. It's me. It's me. It's me. That's Malga. Yes, it's me. And so incident response is an area where, if you think of it from the view of maybe not the best scenario, fire service, the emergency responders, something happens, you call the emergency, they come over, there's a team that handles, they call it, they contain the situation, and after then, they can take you to the ambulance, to the hospital, you get stabilized and you recover. So that whole journey, incident response and recovery, also spend time in that area. And so it's good to be here. I think first of all, I would say thank you to NES. Malga here was surprised because actually it was, the country manager of Nigeria was meant to be here with me, but she couldn't make it. So I'm covering for her. So he was surprised he didn't see somebody with long hair. We'll briefly talk about 3 things today. There is a very interesting thing that happened today, which you would find out in a few minutes. The first part of what we would discuss is a global perspective of trends, threats, what's changing in the world of security, whether offensive, defensive. So we will talk about that, but the interesting thing about that perspective is it's a report published every year, and this version, which we'll talk about, was published at 2 p.m. today. So it's still fresh. You still have the opportunity to dive into it. There's an executive summary of 13 pages, but there is a larger version. But we would glaze through it. The other thing we would do is, that's the global perspective. There is always going to be what's happening out there. And then there is the Africa perspective. So closer to home, within our space, what exactly is happening with respect to cyber resilience. And then we can touch home and talk of Nigeria. So there's also something else I would do today, or would not do today. I think anything we do with respect to how we portray Nigeria is not going to be so negative, because security in itself is two-sided. So you would see those sides of it. Now, before I proceed, I have a question. Who here is security part of your day-to-day in the crowd? Is it? I know, sir. But is there anyone here whose security is part of your day-to-day? Either from a sales point or you work with security. Is there anyone here? Okay, so in your organization, do you know who is responsible for security? Who? Any kind of security. There is? Okay. So let's come. So head of technology is responsible for security, right? It's probably very similar in wherever you are, right? Okay. By the end of today, and I think maybe as early as now, the first expectation is it's a shared responsibility. There are some people that get paid for it. There are some people that are hired for it. But we all have our part to play with security. Now, the world is changing so fast that if you leave that responsibility alone, everyone gets affected by it. So we'll just briefly touch on those three areas. And there is, I think the key word in today's conversation is cyber resilience. And I will just slightly describe what cyber resilience is. Let's start from the very bare, what is resilience? So who, for example, over the past 2 years has taken anti-malaria? Not malaria, anti-malaria, to prevent yourself from having malaria. Has anyone had that in the past 2 years? Has anyone had malaria in the past 2 years? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. But do you do anti-malaria? Or do you avoid mosquitoes? Or do you do something about it? So the idea is there are probably times where you almost had malaria, but your body fought it. And some people break out one thing or the other. But in the lamest of terms, resilience is the ability to withstand something that would happen that's not positive. So how can you withstand it? What have you done to prepare yourself for it? And what would you do to recover from it? That's resilience. So in the realm of cyber resilience is in your organization, in your house, with your bank account, with what's your, let's call it your crown jewel, what's important to you. How resilient are you in case something is going to happen? Like, do you hold your phone like this when you are walking outside? You could do it in some places, but if the real owner takes it from you, you either should be able to fight for it or run after. Now, if you can't fight and run, it means you didn't prepare yourself for something unfortunate that happened. What could you have done? Maybe hold it firm, keep it away. So resilience is that culture of building yourself up to be able to deal with the unforeseen, unexpected, but let's expect it. There is a concept in security that's called zero trust. The concept, one of the principles is just assume you are breached, assume you are exposed, assume what you think is sacred is open. Just assume it. When you assume it, you start building defenses to say, what's the worst thing that can happen? Yeah, they could break into this place, but they won't get anything valuable. So it's the way attackers are and the way you have to defend that's kind of changing. So I'm sharing the screen. Okay, sweet. So one thing we should have in mind is attackers are always persistent. Attackers started being persistent years ago as soon as we were improving with technology. So before, I'm sure you would see that you must have seen those old pictures where a 5 megabyte drive could not pass through this door. Then, if somebody wants to steal the information in there, they have to carry the whole thing. But now things have changed. And so attackers are more persistent, and all they want to do eventually is find divisive tactics and take control. That's really what they want. Taking control means you own this space and somebody comes to take that space from you. It's no longer your own. And so that's what attackers really do. And they try to use divisive tactics so that they can eventually gain access and take control of your environment. So, over time, when it comes to what's been happening in cybersecurity, the rise of attacks has just been going up and up and up. There are some statistics you will see that you will realize that in the past 2 years, there are so many attacks happening. And you are wondering, even if you do nothing, you would be attacked. So imagine not doing anything. You are just the lowest hanging fruits for an attacker because they are persistently trying to attack. And of course, with what's changing now, the warfare that goes on is really, you would see a lot of nation-state kind of attacks. So country to country. You would see stats, for example, where something happened somewhere in the world and a country just decided, these people are not my priority anymore, and they faced another set of people in 1 year. And so it's the ease at which people can just yield that weapon that's making it seem like a stray bullet could touch anyone. So assume at any point in time that you could be vulnerable. So like I mentioned, the 5th edition of, it's called the Digital Defense Report. It was released around 2 o'clock. If you like to read and see stats about security, there's a 13-page summary, but there's an extended one. And what we would do quickly is we will just go through some interesting facts about what's happening. I don't know how clear this is. Okay. So I would point it out. So first of all, from, the question will be, how can we, for example, how relevant is the information we share? Well, it's quite relevant because if you think about it, in numbers, it's about 78 trillion security signals coming from different devices, different applications, different people, different locations. And the idea with security now is you have to have enough information to understand what's happening. So the less you know, or the less you see, the less you can protect. The more you see, the more you can understand. And so there's so much signals coming in. That's one side. Secondly, is there's a lot of investment in people. If you look at some stats on cybersecurity, available jobs, and the question is there are not enough people in the cybersecurity field to fill up the gaps in cybersecurity. And awareness is even something that you will realize we all don't have, or we have it to different levels. So at the end of the day, it still comes down to how do you invest in people so that they can be more aware and skilled to be able to deal with. It's a wild world out there. So with respect to what's evolving, the 5 top things that you would see, and maybe I will avoid the less technical ones. One is nation-state threats. You see, countries attacking each other. The second is ransomware is still top on the list, but you will find out something very interesting that has happened with ransomware. Who knows how ransomware can cripple you? Because people have had ransomware incidents in organizations, in governments, in hospitals, and even on their personal computers, where something just locks up all your files, and then they're asking you to pay ransom through crypto. That's where the name came from. Fraud has also changed its dimensions slightly. So if you look at the industries that are being targeted, I think IT is not surprising. But it's surprising that the education and research sector is being targeted more than any other sector. And the reason that's happening is because education and research, they can easily be used as test beds. They want to try stuff before they are discovered. It's a good place to try their things on before they go to the people that can actually defend against them. And then the next on the list is government. So government is responsible for critical infrastructure and citizens. So they are the next on the list. But it's interesting they are not maybe one or two. Other areas just share the stats on how they are being targeted by attackers. Another major thing a lot of people haven't realized is the influence of misinformation. So a lot of misinformation campaigns are geared towards countries. And interestingly, 2024 is about the biggest year globally for elections. At least within a few countries in a continent, there's an election that is about to happen in this year, 2024. And what has happened is there has been a rise in influence campaigns, and the rise in influence campaigns is meaning they are targeting how they influence people's decisions during election. It's also interesting that there are only 3 countries in this list, and those 3 countries top the list of attack groups. So basically 3 countries doing all the election manipulation all around. Another interesting thing that happens during elections is, the concept of domains, yahoo.com, google.com. A lot of government institutions use the very, let's call them, the personal emails, Google Mail, instead of a .gov email. Now, towards election periods, governments try to sensitize how they communicate with citizens, people influence votes, campaigns. And what happens is they start using the government services, like registering the domains. But a lot of them are configured very insecurely. And before that happens, you find attackers doing a lot of registering of funny domains. So you will see domains that are not the same, and if you don't pay attention, you would be clicking and sharing information with something that is basically going somewhere else. You know, log into this, you share your credentials. Now, this is the example I mentioned earlier. Before the conflict between, there was an incident 7th of October last year in the Middle East. Before that conflict, a country was spending about 1/3 of its attacks on a particular country in North America. Immediately after that, October 7th, it's easy to follow the breadcrumbs. 50% of its efforts were focused on a different country. Now, if you don't look at it holistically, you wouldn't probably see the connection. But immediately after something happens, they decide, and it's heavy campaign on influencing people, misinformation, on shifting the narratives. And it's something that happens constantly. So that's an interesting thing you would see with a lot of security stats. Now, I mentioned ransomware. Now, ransomware-related incidents have increased 3 times. But guess what? Almost 3 times. But the interesting thing about it is ransomware attacks that have been successful have dropped almost 3 times. So what happens is people are more security aware about ransomware. People are, they are installing their software. Now people are updating. People are having the right antivirus. People are saving on cloud storage where it's not exposed. People are doing all of those things. Unlike 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, people were paying ransom with free money. But now the orientation has changed. So that's a good thing with ransomware. Fraud hasn't really reduced. Instead, it's actually transformed. Now, who knows about telemarketing kind of fraud? Someone calls you, they try to send something. Even WhatsApp hacks right now, they call you, they want a code. They want you to probably disable the PIN. My mom's WhatsApp was hacked 2 weeks ago. What do I do? But the truth is, at that point it happened. What you think of at that point is, what are you losing? So in this case, what people are doing with telemarketing is very different. Guess what they are doing? They are using AI. And that's the new thing that's happening. If the attackers can be smart enough to use technology to do things faster, all well and good. So now they are using AI, and they are doing deepfakes on voices, on videos, and the amount of money people are losing just from right now, what's happening with deepfakes over phone has tripled almost times 400 compared to things like malware and phishing. It's gone way further, and people are believing it, and people are losing money. So that's something that is really coming up, and it's interesting. But almost all the attacks we're talking of have to do with your identity. Now, the best example of your identity is, let's call it your username and password. But do you know that, and we've been screaming this for years, 99%, okay, let me flip it. 1% of any attack where somebody gains access to your account, only 1% is not password related. Every other kind of attack was through your password. So you see those practices of, I've been using this password for 5 years. Then you change it and you just add 2 characters. Or you write your password in a sheet of paper or in a paper. Or you reuse passwords in 10 different sites, for ease, for convenience. Just take it that you don't own the account. The real owners are using it. They are learning. And eventually, if you have something valuable through your email, it could be your contacts. By the way, there are people that save non-contact information in their contact list, like their card number and BVN. Yeah. So, cool. 99% of attacks, if you do something about your password, and the easiest thing you can do is multi-factor authentication. It's the easiest thing. And please use an app. Don't use SMS. Okay. Now, and I need to move very fast. So we did something. We've had very high-profile security incidents that have either affected our products, or have affected, or third-party products that have affected our customers. And so we launched something called the Secure Future Initiative. What that initiative really does is we're looking into ourselves to make sure that we ensure that all our systems can be as secure as possible. Basically, we're trying to build our resilience because some of the leaks that are happening, some of the things are very basic. They are oversight. And so we've put in a lot of effort into it. Internally, about 700,000 plus applications were decommissioned because they were incompatible, we were non-compliant, sorry. And almost, you have an Azure tenant for tests, for dev, for lab. We killed about more than 5 million because some of them have credentials that are either reused or one thing or the other. So we're also doing our own hygiene, and we're doing it in one of the, it's okay, in one of the simplest way forwards. Let's prioritize how we do cybersecurity resilience. First, you start from the identities. Man, secure your identities. Next, you do your devices. Then you do the data. And afterwards, you can start being able to respond and detect effectively. Then you automate everything by having a team that's dedicated, what people will call a security operations team. Those 5 tiers is good enough to take you and build your resilience much higher. So I gave an example with AI and defense attacks with AI, and you can also defend good with AI. But let me just move to the Africa perspective. Now, if you are familiar with what's happening with, it's the ITU, International Telecoms Unit. They do a lot of assessment surveys, and what they've done is a country assessment of how countries are committed to cybersecurity. So they check 5 different things. They check the legal, they check technical, they check organization, they check if you are collaborative and you are encouraging inclusive stakeholder management with other parties when it comes to security, because it's a shared responsibility. Or if you also have the ability to grow. They check each of these things and they kind of put countries in a tier. Now, even though Nigeria know they carry last, I'm sure you'll be wondering, where do we fit in the tier? Tier 1 and tier 2 are basically countries that have a strong intention to cybersecurity commitments. Legal-wise, they have laws that govern cybersecurity at the highest level. Technical-wise, they have institutions that are focused on driving cybersecurity initiatives. Organization-wise, they have a strategy, they have a policy, and they are monitoring the implementation of those strategies. And then they are constantly evolving and learning and bringing the feedback so that they can improve the cybersecurity posture. And lastly, there's a lot of stakeholder collaboration. So they did this tiering and, where do we fall? So we wouldn't use the global view because the global view gives you the idea of, most times we're just somewhere scratching. So let's bring it home in Africa. And Nigeria is in the establishing phase. Of course, you look at countries that are in the role modeling phase and then arguments over who has the best jollof that's springing up. But really, it's the commitment of a country to cybersecurity resilience. That's what it's about. As this table maybe looks like, oh, there's so many African countries in tier 3 and tier 4, basically in establishing and evolving. But the truth is, even in the past 1 year, about 9 countries just came into the list. So it's a good thing, it's progressive. And Nigeria being in T3, really, there are lots of things that we're doing that's going to move us to the advancing stage over time. So it's not all bad. Of course, we know the challenges in Africa. Technology is a challenge. Internet penetration is still very low. And, the more you have accessible internet, the more technology drives innovations, the more life is easy. So as long as we're growing that and also having that cybersecurity culture, then we should probably be moving to the role modeling phase. And so, but this is just a view of other countries in Africa that are doing one thing or the other in building their cyber resilience. Nigeria is also not left out. I was happy when I saw our Cybersecurity Act was updated this year, 2024. And our cybersecurity strategy was updated in 2021. It's good progress. Well, there are some countries that haven't had their cybersecurity strategies. Some don't have. That's why you would see some countries in building, for example. And then from a Nigeria perspective, this basically highlights I will call it our strength. So we're strong in legal measures. We have the right legal frameworks to drive cybersecurity. And we're also strong in technical measures where there is effort, at least to be able to track cybersecurity compliance, cybersecurity resilience. The truth is there's a lot of collaboration happening with external law enforcement on cybersecurity in the past few years that some things wouldn't have happened without that kind of collaboration. I'm sure you know the one I'm referring to. I think it happened in Dubai. But there's a lot more that has happened where you have people being extradited because they committed crimes in other countries, and we're working with Interpol or other agencies to track those crimes. Now, if they were here, would we have been able to track it that much? Maybe not, but collaboration closes that gap, which is why it's very important. So like I mentioned, our cybersecurity policy was launched 10 years ago, but there was an update 3 years ago. Policies should be updated at least every 3 years, so that's a good one. And then there's other areas in building our response readiness that we are actually driving towards, and that's only going to develop as long as we have an approach and a strategy. So it's a shared responsibility. Individuals, organizations, and the government. And so if we take each part for ourselves and say, look, as an individual, what area do I need to focus on? It's very easy. Use strong passwords, use multi-factor authentication, update your phones, update your software, use secure apps. If something is dodgy, it's definitely dodgy. The straightforward ones are very straightforward. And from an organization point of view, security is a culture that has to go from up down. So when an executive wants convenience over security, put my password never to expire, is not just putting himself at risk, not just putting the organization at risk, but it's also building a culture of not being cyber resilient that just trickles down. So it becomes the norm, it becomes normalized, and that entire organization is a bit slow in adopting changes to what's happening out there, because the attackers are not slow. The attackers are very, very aggressive. And from a government point of view, government drives governance, they drive policies, they drive all of that. And having those right policies that match what's happening out there in the world will give us equal responsibility in addressing this. So that's it from me. Did I make it on time? But yes, questions. It's good to hear from you. And I thought it was a smaller room. We would have done, known each other more, but now I'm outnumbered. Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. You have any questions? You have any areas? I think I could drop the link of the reports in the Zoom chats, but you guys here wouldn't see the Zoom chat yet. But the report was released today. It's a good read for those who are security conscious. Yes. It came out just at 2:00. So it was right on time, but there was early access to prepare with it, which is also something that was good. So anything from the audience? Anything you want to talk about? Any questions? Let me give it this way.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, okay. Don't worry, I'll speak.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, where does the oil and gas have it getting that how that any news?
The oil and gas, so oil and gas, electricity, water, they normally fall under critical national infrastructure, especially if they bring in revenue or they are supporting livelihood. Now, for oil and gas, in most cases, it comes with, look what was happening with, what were those things that they were doing with the pipes, vandalizing the pipes? That's critical national infrastructure. And the mundane ways they are actually infiltrating the system doesn't have anything to do with technology. It's bare. So what's happening a lot in the oil and gas space, especially for countries that have had that infrastructure for long, is that they are legacy technology. The way they are being monitored isn't the way modern endpoints are being monitored today. So there was something I showed on, it falls under IoT or OT, operating technology, where those devices, Microsoft started scanning some of those environments and it was alarming. And why did the alarm bells go up? In the US, for example, there were attacks on, look, if there is attack on our water system, how many people will be affected? Not much, eh? We're not very reliant on it, unfortunately. For them, they are heavily reliant on it. So there were attacks on that system. And what kind of attacks? They don't need to blow it up. They just need to make one or two things malfunction. High pressure here, low volume here, a mix of this here, and it affects a whole city, a whole community. And so the technologies used to monitor those systems, a lot of those technologies are very legacy. You still have the ability to, detect and protect them, but it has to be done a bit more aggressively than some of our endpoints because they are critical national infrastructure. And yes, there are lots of, so any nation state attack that you see is predominantly targeting national infrastructure most times. Because nations fight based on, back in the days when a country wins another country, they take over everything. They take over if you were making money from exports, they take over it. So they target national infrastructure. And yes, in the oil and gas sector, legacy systems, but there are also oil and gas companies that have evolved, that have transformed. If you look at how some Middle East countries do oil and gas, it's very, very different. And so they started with good technology, recent technology, and they are able to secure their investments much, much easier. They're able to monitor the outputs, what's expected. They're able to scale out, and the system is available. So yes, and their stats. You would actually see in the reports, there is a whole section dedicated to operating technology, and you will see some of the stats that come out of there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Right. I know we're talking about cyber security, but we're in Nigeria, and when somebody steals my password, or I'll lose money or something, right? But when somebody kidnaps me, I lose everything, essentially. So I'm wondering, and these days you hear about kidnappers who, after kidnapping people, they send their account number, some use even though it's physical, but a lot of they use to other.
space. They want to go technology-wise. They want to have presence in the internet. But how can they afford to secure themselves when you can be hacked by anybody? And even after going through the process of securing yourselves using maybe the service provider, you're still hacked. How do we, because we tried to secure a bit more and they said, oh, it's going to cost you a certain amount of money, more than our annual revenue actually then. So how can we secure and still be in business? That's my question.
I would use the reality of this world to answer, because let's match it with reality. Today, it is very, very cheap. If your password has been stolen, passwords, I'm using passwords as an example, the cost of somebody buying your password is very cheap. In fact, the way they do it, I think the last I could have got track of it, maybe 1,000 passwords is like $5. 1,000 stolen passwords. Now, where are these passwords stolen from? They're stolen from applications that are exposing passwords that are insecure, that are not properly configured. And so there's a concept also in security where you say you need to ruin your attacker's return on investment. So if an attacker has $5 to buy 1,000 passwords, well, you had better not be part of the 1,000 passwords. There are people that they will try and it to go in. For yours, maybe the extra you need to put in is multi-factor authentication. So it's, yes, they stole your password, but there's nothing they can do with the password. Now, what you've just done differently is you have minimized the blast radius. The bomb would blow, but you've contained it. They've stolen your password, but what can they do with it? You change it. You've put something in place, but the person who didn't, they've gone in. He had better, or she had better not have anything of value in the account or with the account. So with security, look, the truth is security is not expensive because it can be expensive, but it's cheaper to get you now. It's much more cheaper. And the technologies that would keep you safe, you know, I showed a stat, 99% of identity theft is stopped by multi-factor authentication. And guess what? All the free identity providers today, Google, Microsoft, all of them, they give multi-factor authenticator free. Free. Do people want to change the behavior? So what people don't pay for in changing behavior, a lot of times in hygiene, they pay for in maybe technology solutions or security solutions. Security doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. In fact, security shouldn't cost more than what you are protecting. It should be cheaper than what you are protecting, and then you lace it up with security practices. Sorry, I hope that's helpful.
So I want to take off because somebody was saying that I'm going to chase him out of the room. So I want to take up the CEO of NESG's hat and wear a hat I wore 13 years ago. Right. So I wrote a report, Future of Communications Technology. I think it's online still. So I was serving as the national advisor for Chief Ernest Ndukwe. He was his last year of being EVC of NC. And we printed load. At that time, we broke the threats to broadband into cybercrime, cyber espionage, conflict, cyber terrorism, and then what we thought was going to be likely online abuse of vulnerable nations. This was 13 years ago. And we were clear that at a country level, the biggest three threats was one, and this frightens the living daylight out of me, the multiple agencies that collect my biometrics Okay, my fingerprint, my eye, my signature, they sign this, stamp that, take the hand, take the 4 fingers, take the index finger, and I do it for NIN, I do it for register a card, I do it at passport, and all these places of collection. And this was our guess. Even if I taught all Nigerians, to do the multiple authentication, which, by the way, has been a massive culture shift challenge for us. How do I solve the problem of multiple biometric collect points? Absolutely. That suddenly was a multiple authentication situation, except I have a combination of authentication that all the biometrics does not open. I'm vulnerable. And I think that when we discuss cybersecurity in Nigeria, that's something we don't talk about enough, that our identity is likely out there already. I'm talking of fingerprint and your biometrics, which means this is my baseline entry point into organization and personal cyber resilience response. That at the basic level, presume that someone has all your fingerprints, someone has your signature, and that plus your poor password is no longer enough. And so the additional checks on special secret passwords, sign-offs, etc. If you can use your returner, if you have a laptop or system that gives an face recognition, add it. I think that's the world we will live in for a while. And so when people say, I just have my fingerprint as the authentication on my system, I say it's not in fact, under our circumstances, a bad idea, especially when you're tying that to money. There are people that sign off monies just because the phone makes the ease of that go away. And so we then put in one box national identity collection as our biggest country cyber system risk, because someone could harvest us in our millions at once. As we move towards this convergence, okay, and so this is now my question. So that's the background. This is now my question. As we move towards this convergence of biometrics, NIN, passport, all fused together. We have now finished phone and NIN, which makes, of course, BVN to NIN to phone a joke. It's done. I mean, to be honest, what is delaying us now is more legal institutional bottlenecks than anything else. What kind of cyber resilience response must the country bring to this large identity data ecosystem, especially because we have an intention to fiscalize it? Every conversation on data financial services says, when we pull it together, we'll deepen digital financial services. Everybody says, when we pull it together, we'll be able to mop up the market, spend more money. But what they're not telling us is that our cyber risk and threats will be of a completely different order of magnitude. So from a country point of view, what must we get right with that to win, please?
So when I was describing it's not my former life. There was a time I was actively working in that mode, which was incidents. It wasn't incident response, it was recovery. So there's incident response, and then there's containment, then there's recovery. And there's one objective we have in a compromised recovery scenario. The objective is take back control. Yeah, you've lost control. Someone has come and taken your stuff and he's moved. Okay, he's moved, or she is moved. Let me be, and the person has moved with your data. What do? The list is take back control. Now, being able to make that data unusable is very possible. There are some economies today that they have digitalized. They had a digital strategy for governments, for public sector. They've digitalized. They have a central identity that's tied to other identities. Phone is tied to the social security. They have all of that. But if you look at it in the real sense, all the systems that make use of those identities go through multiple verification process where it's difficult for your identity to be stolen. And if it is, there's constant monitoring to detect it quickly. So it could be things like it's a trend. What security does with telemetry is if there's a strange behavior now, there's a pattern that shows this is abnormal and they can put a stop to the process. But look, if it scares me to, I've done passports, NIN, I've done NIN updates when renewing passports at the airports, the way they snap your stuff, you don't know where it's going. It scares me because all our identities, the truth is you have no control what's going to happen to it. And we're not matured enough to say, I don't want you to take my, look, if you go through an e-gate, you actually have a right to say, I don't want to be scanned. You have a right. And you go to the officer that will do physical process. You chose privacy over convenience, for example, and you felt that. So those options are there, but it still comes down to, in taking back control, ensuring that even if those, our identities can be changed, even though they can be changed, can they be used in a way that's to our detriment? Like, can they access our banking systems? If we have a good reporting scenario where the bank can spot, stop, and even recover funds in situations where there is theft, then it means there's just so much the attacker can do, and they will be able to at least limit that level of exposure. But yes, we are in, I don't know what will happen in a few years from now.
I just want to contribute a bit to answering, because he asked what we're doing as a country. You mentioned earlier the cyber security, the law that was passed, and the amendment this year. I am aware that there's an order, the designation and protection of critical infrastructure, critical information infrastructure, actually. So I was wondering when you were replying to the lady earlier, because it is about critical information infrastructure, not infrastructure generally. And yes, so critical. So it covers a range of institutions and the kind of information they have gathered, which will include our passport office, for example, or even NCC that he made reference to, or my institution, the Central Securities Clearing System. So in principle, and I think we discussed this at an earlier session, Nigeria has most of the laws in place. We have all the policies, we have everything on paper. It's very good, it's wonderful. So it is how it is implemented that is yet to be seen. Thank you.
And look, see, it's a valid point. Somebody will say, some people don't have it on, at least we have it on paper. I was speaking with a senior colleague last week, and he said, if it's to write, we will write. We will write, we have all the policies. But then one of the things Cybersecurity Global Index tracks is every cybersecurity strategy should have an action plan, and that action plan should be implemented. So a lot of times, even with customers, when you say, let's review your strategy, you review the strategy, you come up with a roadmap, and nobody is ready to move. So there's still the human factor or the organization factor of what's driving, if our maturity is this level, what can we do to raise it up at this level? And normally there is always a plan. It's just the application of that plan. Yeah.
Sorry, just a different conversation, and it has nothing to, well, it now has something to do with us. We have a situation where, in my opinion, in 20 years of building the GSM revolution, digital infrastructure, because of the costs, the efficiency, maybe also the ingenuity of China and Chinese products, almost 97% of all installed digital infrastructure capacity in Nigeria is Huawei. Now, on top this digital infrastructure, we're going to build in all our artificial intelligence capabilities. I was reading the United States report on AI, and they've put China cyber security threats as a big threat to AI as a whole. And I don't know if this is geopolitics at all or whether they makes common sense. So they say they will not put any of US AI technology on China infrastructure assets, etc. Of course, I think for this week, for example, Nigeria will be sitting with US-based AI entities to discuss integration when all our infrastructure stock is China. And we are told that the Chinese infrastructure stock is vulnerable to cyber terrorism, cyber crimes, and basically country cyber sovereignty abuses. From a cyber resilience point of view, I think we are stuck because we're neither the creators of AI or digital infrastructure. Exactly. So I think from a cyber resilience point of view, the big question is, as a country, do we know what we are buying from either of these countries that are at war with each other? And how do we protect Nigeria if we have a full-blown China-US AI war where counter systems in terms of data centers, data infrastructure, and ecosystems are attacked across these two nations, we being users of both? What are our vulnerabilities and how do we respond?
You know, a lot of times when it comes to, especially at that level, if a country hosts their critical infrastructure on a private provider, for example, a lot of times they start making demands like, you know, Germany says, I want a data center in my country. Full control. China did the same thing. The UAE has done the same. Qatar has done the same. And what they've done basically is ensure they have some level of control over the system, but they're also doing something else. They're doing things like they're having skilled people that can manage those platforms. Basically, the service provider has the brains, they replicate it, but they are actually the ones that can manage the platform, and they kind of own the platform with service level agreements with the service provider. Now, do we need to keep being in a situation where at the receiving end, you know, we don't have a choice? I think we don't need to be, and we shouldn't be. I won't call it an African problem because there are countries in the world that are not also in the same situation. But the earlier we start taking control of our stuff, the more comfortable we will be, the less vulnerable we will be, the more we start taking control of our things. We could have a conversation of, can we have a data center in Nigeria from one of the big cloud providers? Maybe yes, maybe not. But before we get there, you know, how are we able to manage our infrastructure? Are we managing our infrastructure? You know, or have we matured to the point where we can actually maintain our infrastructure? Unfortunately, maybe not. We have too many factors that has shown it's difficult to even manage what has been brought and developed. And one way or the other, we can't maintain it. But in my opinion, I think we should be moving away from that dependency of being torn between either, like they say, big elephants. Yeah. John? Anything else from anyone else? Are we still good on time? Okay. Yes.
So the geopolitics of cyber security, or geopolitics of security, whether it's physical or cyber, and China is here, US is here, okay, I don't see a situation where US will come and tell us that because you build your infrastructure and this thing, you cannot, and then we have to uplift everything. They might as well say the embassy cannot be in Nigeria because the embassy will use our funds to talk. So I think there's a limit to what they can do. But I think at a certain point, US doesn't want China to get its secret and vice versa. But I don't know whether it's at the level of general use. I think that sometimes, for instance, there's a chip, they shouldn't get Chinese chips, China shouldn't get chips from America or the technology of itself. But I think at some point, yeah, I understand what this says, but I don't see a situation where, for instance, we have to overhaul our,
Yeah.
our entire
Yeah.
network system
Yeah.
because we can buy Copilot or
Yeah.
something.
The most so when we look at what nation states actors are doing, you would see two scenarios. One scenario, you have a country targeting another country, cyber warfare. And in the other scenario, you have individuals targeting a country, but supported by their country. It's the same thing, basically. You know, they can say, I didn't tell them to do it, but you didn't stop them from doing it because you know the harm that would happen. And a lot of these countries, that's what they do with each other. They actually have situations where, look, the stats are crazy. Constant attacks. You know, the fact that it's coming from a regional location, you kind of have to own it. You can't hold yourself away from it. And they do that with each other so much. But then for the countries that are torn in between.
But this then goes to a different question. So yeah, the IKEA Global Intelligence System,
Yeah.
right? For the period that we monitored DOS specific type attacks on banking. So between 2015 and 2020, we were seeing almost 80% of our attacks coming from particular continents.
Yeah.
Now, those continents they were coming from correlate to some degree with where the infrastructure we built our digital infrastructure from is coming from. So it's not something that, I'm sorry, I'm going back to this. It's not something that we can take for granted. Because you look at the size. There was a year where we were discussing 150,000 attacks, then it just jumped. The next year was 1 million, 1.7 million, and 5 million DOS attacks. Then it became crazy. You know, you start to see numbers rise to 25 million DOS attacks in banking sector alone.
Yeah.
In 1 year.
The
scale.
The scale is crazy.
The scale of the attacks and the regions that then dominate, whether or not it's a country attack on your country, it tells you that you need to pay attention to maybe some systems level vulnerability where hackers from that region have mastered your basic infrastructure and can just take advantage of it. So I think I say it for that reason. But also nations that see that they can be between two elephants in a cyber war opt for safe ground. So for example, South Korea, which like us has Chinese infrastructure built into its digital infrastructure and has it has built its own AI, its own national level AI system. If you ask me, why can Nigeria just go and collect South Korea, JJ, and avoid being in the middle of a cyber war?
Those ones, anyway.
So, but the point I'm making is
Yeah.
that with cyber resilience, shouldn't we as a country be playing scenarios also where you are not at risk because of at least in the bank, so 2015 to 2020, the banking DOS attacks, if you take the bunch that came out of one region, you have to ask what is it about that region and the attacks that were originating that points to something in our architectural system, our banking software, banking system architecture that created almost mirror vulnerabilities, right? I don't know the answer, but I think that these things, when we start to look at this data more often
Yeah.
and ask this type of questions, then maybe the cyber chiefs in the banking sector, for example, we could do a standalone. Where are your attacks coming
Yeah.
from? What is the structure of the attacks?
You know,
Which regions?
When it comes to data sharing or threat intelligence sharing, besides each organization or each institution being able to push what they have to help others, the drive is actually a national strategy that should come through information communications. Because regardless of what's happening, if one provider can be protected, then the others can be protected. And technology today has made, there's another, all these new evolving trends is because technology is evolving. So supply chain risk, basically, okay. If I tell you that as we speak now, I just say it casually, and it could happen, it's possible your bank account has reduced. I'm just saying it casually. If we spend 10 minutes here, some of you would start checking. Let me just check. Because you start asking yourself, is it possible? And you realize it's possible. Why is it possible? How much control? Do you know where your money is now? Do you know where it is? No, you don't. So you really don't have control over it, right? If you don't have control over it, anything can happen to it. And so you start, I hope that's not what you're checking. But the truth is, what has happened with the idea of supply chain risk is you might feel you are fine. You might buy a phone and it came in a sealed box. But before it was sealed, what happened with the phone? Before it was sealed, was something planted in the phone. Now, I saw something interesting today, and it gave me, we actually had the experience about 5 years ago. So we used to do a lot of events in the office, trainings, and we used to give flash drives and all. Until it came to the realization that what happens if those flash drives are compromised? It's a very good supply chain. We could get a vendor and say we want 100 flash drives because we have a trading event, and they will give us 100 flash drives sealed. But do you have any control over where the hard drives came from? Do you know if they were preloaded? Do you know if everyone who plugs it in, automatically things start running? The truth is you have no clue. And because you have no clue, that's why the concept of zero trust comes into play. You can't always trust, but you can verify. You can't assume because your computer starts running slow, something is happening. Someone could be driving crypto with your PC, could be mining crypto. Yeah, it's a real situation. And what you are just doing is they just need you to put on your PC and you're running the CPU. A software is doing it at the background. So it comes down at the end of the day to, if you don't have control over it, then be cautious about it. Have an extra eye on it. Don't assume it's that way. We never know. There was a time my earphones were acting up. I was already being suspicious. Who is intercepting my calls? And it was me. I did something to the earphones. But yeah.
But looking further at this, when you talk about the geopolitics of the geopolitical cyber security threats, so if you go back in time, and there was a comment you made somewhere that when you go back in time, if two countries are adversarial, they send soldiers across and they fight until one wins the other, defeats the other one. But that's a very expensive way. You lose soldiers, you remove bad stuff. Now, if you look into the future, that is going to change. It's already changed. It's already changed anyway, but it's going to keep changing. So I assume that down the line, there'll be no reason why you want to send soldiers, 18-year-old soldiers, to go and kill themselves. It's not going to happen. So also, I can cripple you. So you degrade the person's infrastructure and all that stuff. So I think we have to get used to the fact that war has changed. We're at the end of the original system of war, where it was that you have to send soldiers to go and die and all that stuff. And the more we move online, the more that will become apparent. So if you're talking about national security, it's not about building as maybe go to the border and amass soldiers there so that they can defend their guys Benin, attack from Benin. But being sure that we're spending money in the right place to make sure that we secure the country. And that this is going to keep happening because I think that the human nature is that we must be at war. We must be, it's a survival thing, so there must be wars. So that's war has to keep happening. So if, I don't know how further ahead Nigeria thinks, but it is, if we're going to be the leader in Africa, for instance, in every way, I guess that also at any age, we have to start thinking about how does Nigeria think about 50 years down the line or 20 years down the line and say, it's not just about your GDP growing because somebody can attack you, your GDP will fall. You can just stay somewhere and then people are GDP or something.
Survival. You know, we can take care of ourselves without depending on external help. Otherwise, if there's a dependence on external help, then we're finished. But yeah.
As individuals, you made me more suspicious. So if I buy a cell phone, for example, do I start taking it apart to check? How do you check? So simple check. You use the example of the flash.
Yeah.
So there are institutions that don't allow flash.
Mhm.
But what if I want a flash for my personal use?
Okay.
Or earphones? Are you always going to have to try and take apart?
Yeah.
a
You'll
new
be
device?
paranoid.
How do you check those simple?
Yeah. 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 Technology has changed now that from electricity points, you transfer data. From cables that used to charge with electricity, you're using their data cables. So you can put stuff in, remove stuff in. Yes. So look, you don't need to be paranoid, but there are a few basic things you can do for yourself. Okay, I buy a phone. Have you seen people that will buy a phone and they are looking for who will help them transfer their data to the new phone? You, from day one, have just given everything to somebody else. I take it as your data, your information is your responsibility. So from day one, it's okay to let someone do it, but with oversight, with an understanding of you can do it. You just allowed somebody to do it. So I think we can still be cautious. We can still be vigilant and verify, always verify. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with buying a new phone and it starts formatting. Well, to the best of your knowledge, at least it didn't start up like somebody with somebody else's DP. It's a fresh phone. Nothing wrong with you saying, you know what, I can run the format again. But of course, we know that even when the phones are off, there are things that can still happen, right? You do, within your control, at least you don't find yourself wanting. And you can sleep at night. Don't start chasing the attacker. I heard there is a question online. Good day. Could we also have some thoughts on the issue of attribution to countries where cybercrime are being or have been committed by non-state actors? It's a very good question because it's important that governments take responsibility with attribution by working with, the providers of the information. So if there is a compromise and you find out the origin of the compromise, you attribute. It should change the relationship. There should be repercussion. There are basic laws of engagement that show what should and should not be done. So if that line is crossed, then there should be some kind of attribution. It's why a lot of countries have bilateral relationships where somebody commits a crime in one country, they can take the person from that country to the country where he actually committed a crime because they have those level of relationships. But you also see some countries that something happens and people will actually run to that country because they can't be touched. And so it comes down to the relationships between the countries, but attribution is something that should be done. Once it's determined, there should be attribution. It's like within our midst, somebody has done wrong. Everyone should know. And then you deal accordingly. Of course, you would watch out for the same thing happening again. Regina, I hope that answers your question. They're kicking us out of the room now. I don't know if there are any other questions online or in person. So let's off the mic. Thanks, everyone.
Pictures, please. Pictures, please. Pictures, please. Pictures.